4 times as many people are displaced by climate, drought, floods, bad weather than by war today.
Dr. Koko Warner, thank you so much for joining us. You have spent the last 15 years researching the connections between climate change and migration. Tell me, what is the situation like today?
We have 4 patterns of people on the move related to climate stressors. People will experience storms, floods, and they move very quickly, and we call that displacement. When the situation has stabilized and it's safe to go back, most people try and return. A second pattern that we see today is people whose livelihoods are very sensitive to the climate, farmers, fisher folk, as 2 examples, maybe ranchers, will have trouble with the weather. The rain will come too early or too late, way too much at once, or the rain doesn't come at all. And usually one of the family members will be selected to try and make it to the next place where they can get a job. A third pattern that we see is climate stressors getting mixed in with really complex situations where there's conflict. You'll have a drought that makes the situation even worse. And because of the presence of war and persecution, some people are able to move as refugees because they're protected by the Convention on Refugees, like the Geneva Convention. And there's a fourth pattern that we're only barely starting to see, but we anticipate to be a much larger phenomena in the future, and that is what happens when when you just can't live there anymore. Maybe there's no water, or maybe the coasts are eroding away, or perhaps there's sea level rise. The habitability of a place becomes threatened.
So, and this is actually happening, all of these 4 are actually happening now.
Yes, and all over the world. North, south, take your pick, you'll see really amazing case studies in the literature from coastal Alaska. Indigenous peoples whose traditional livelihoods are on the coast, hunting and fishing, facing permafrost melt, and trying to organize themselves to move to another place. You have small island development states in the Pacific, some areas in sub-Saharan Africa, some areas in, the permafrost areas of Siberia. It's all over the world.
Which parts risk being uninhabitable first, would you say?
We know that deltas, low-lying areas, coastal areas, low-lying small island development states, they immediately come to mind when you talk about sea level rise that's already projected. So these low-lying coastal areas are heavily exposed. Other areas, since you asked about habitability, we know people need water. You can certainly ship water across with pipelines and things. You can transport water far, far distances. We may not have been accustomed to really large quantities, enough to support a civilization. So dry lands are definitely an area that raise questions. But there's another trend that the IPCC literature assessment has identified, and that is biome shift. Here's an example. The country that I live in, even though I'm not from here, Germany, a typical biome in Germany is forest. And over the past years, it's been very dry, and so the forests are under a lot of stress. And some of the literature is suggesting that you may see a forest biome shift, perhaps permanently, to a grassland biome. So those kinds of things also are going on at a very large scale across the world. What we don't know is what that means for where people live and what people need to have a sustained civilization in that area. But those are the big things: low-lying coastal areas, water, so particularly in dry lands, and biome shift. Some reliable numbers that we do have are about displacement. There are 4 times today as many people displaced from weather and climate stressors than by war. Over 20 million people a year.
And this is with the projections of the climate changing a number that is likely to increase.
I hope not. I don't know. But we do know from the science that just the number of extreme events are projected to increase in frequency and severity. But it's really difficult to model how humans behave. What we're finding from the research is that almost always, if you ask people where they want to be, they want to be at home. What we're talking about with climate change often falls into the more difficult category of managing risk. Do I stay and deal with a variety of things, maybe questions about how do I feed my family, where's my paycheck coming from, or my livelihood, kind of weighed against the risk of moving to something uncertain and unknown. What we want to avoid is that vulnerable people become the enemy. The best way to do that is to preempt and minimize the risk from the beginning and create policy that's agreeable, but that takes difficult early conversations.
What do you think? Are we ready to deal with this challenge?
Not yet, but we're getting ready.